Okay, this is just going to be a quick little video going over how to use statics in C Sharp. A couple of fine details to these guys, and they're a very useful thing to have. Now, what a static variable or method, you can have it either way. In this case here we have both a static variable and we have a static method. Instead of statics belonging to the individual instance of a class, like a member variable, so in this case, this member variable here, every single instance of the demo class is going to have its own copy of not static. But in the statics case, they sort of belong to the namespace of the class. You've got, the overall class itself, and the statics belong to it. So any reference to a static from any instance is going to be referring to the same chunk of memory. So regardless of how many instances of demo class I have, I'm going to have one and exactly one copy of its static. Now, whenever I call this increment again, everything's going to be calling the same exact method here. I'm sorry, not increment again, this one. Public static void increment. Whenever this is called, regardless from which one it is, it's going to be calling the same method every single time. Now, why we do this, there's a couple of reasons why. The most basic version is tracking a global ID value. We've got an ID value or some other sort of global type data that is associated with this class that does not change from instance to instance. For example, an ID field to keep track of what ID number things are, or a way of counting how many times you have created this class. A couple of different reasons, but you want to have a value that does not change from instance to instance. They all use the same thing. Or you've got methods that you want to have act on instances of this class or structure, because you can do this in structures as well. They don't really need to belong to it. The most popular method of this is in game programming is vector functions. Now, finding cross products, normalizing vectors, finding the angle between two different vectors. Several of the various popular vector operations are very commonly done between two vectors, and you don't necessarily need to have that associated with a specific instance. It's just something that you do with two vectors. Or if you're doing a utility collection of functions, math, or in the case of Unity, mathf, those two classes there provide a wide range of utility functions that you can use. Also in the case of Unity, the GUI classes make very heavy use of statics to be able to draw the various GUI elements. So that's why we use them. Let's go over the bare bone basics of how to implement them. The keyword, of course, is static. So in this case, I'm saying public static int. They do not have to be public. I can take that out. Of course, that's going to immediately give me errors due to protection level. If you have a private static, that just simply means that, it's a private variable. Only within that class can you access it, which you might want for an ID value. Oops, wrong. So in this case, I'm saying, okay, public static int. So that makes this a static variable. Methods are exactly the same way. You just put a static in before the return type. That's the main key there. It has to be before the return type, so public static void. And now I've declared this as a static method. Now, for initializing, you're going to want to inline your initialization, like this. You don't want to try to initialize your statics in the constructor, as shown here by the bad way. Let's take a quick run on this. Well, actually, cancel. Before we do that, let's take a look at what we're doing here. I'm declaring two instances of demo class, writing out their not static values and what the current static value is the proper way, and then I'm creating two instances of the demo class the wrong way, and again, printing out their not static values. So when we run this, what I would expect to see is the top two lines. I get A is 0 because it was the very first time it was declared, so the static value was 0. Then we increment it, then we declare B. B gets assigned 1, we increment it, so static is 2. However, when I add in, when I do things the bad way, and I have this demo class.isStatic line in here, remember there's only one copy of this. So when I do that, I set it to 0, assign it to not static for A, and then when I come back through and declare it for B again, I do the same thing. I set it to 0, assign it to B, increment static, and so I get 0, 0, and static is 1, which is not what we want to see. The top two lines is what we want to see. So that's why statics, the variables at least, need to be initialized inline on their declaration. You do not want to use the constructor method. Now, using static methods, again, very simple. You notice that here I do not use the demo class. Now, if you're inside a static method and you're referring to static variables, you don't really need to reference the class name. Still might be a good idea just to be really explicit about it, but you don't have to. And strictly speaking, I don't have to use this demo class dot increment here. It will compile and run without it. But anytime you are accessing static information and within the class itself, you should indicate that you are accessing static stuff. So, indicate that, okay, yeah, this is, a static method, demo class.increment. This is a static method. Of course, when you're outside the class file, you don't have a choice in the matter. If I come over here and look, so I call a.increment again, which of course that is a member method, so nothing special for that. But then when I call increment, I call demo class.increment. And then of course I declare a new C class. And if we look at the output on that, we see the output, is as expected. So A is 1. That makes sense because we did increment again, which does increment the not static value. B is 0, which again makes sense, even though they were both of A and B's not static values were initialized to the static value. Now, they're not linked. So A's member variable got incremented, B's member variable did not get incremented, so it's still 0. And then when I go to create C, because I called the increment again and increment, so the first time we increased it to 1, the second time we increased it to 2, and so then after that, when we say C equals new demo class, that's going to take the value of 3. And then after we report that, we say, okay, static is 4. And so that is a really brief overview on statics. And of course, this code can be found on the repository up on Google Projects.